In July 2005, Britain held its breath for a momentous announcement. London had made a bid to host the Olympic Games. And the hopes of millions hung in the balance.
The Games of the 30th Olympiad in 2012 are awarded to the city of London.
Celebrations erupted around the country. After 3 failed attempts, the world's greatest sporting event was at last returning to Britain. But the Games organisers barely had time to draw breath. They now faced a colossal challenge, getting the site and the stadiums ready for 2012.
Nobody's going to put back the opening date of the Olympics.
It would mean demolition on a gigantic scale, overhauling some of the most run-down wastelands in Europe, and a workforce 10,000 strong working around the clock. And to make the task even tougher, London had promised that this Olympic site would be sustainable and environmentally friendly. A promise that would soon prove fraught with difficulties. This would be Britain's biggest and most ambitious construction project in decades. There would be crises.
Can you imagine building a structure for the Olympic Games and then finding out that no athlete was going to get a world record? I mean, it was an absolute no-no.
And there would be triumphs.
I love pressure. Let's have a challenge. The challenge is the Olympics.
With the deadline fast approaching and the whole world watching, the pressure was on. The organisers of the Games had set out an ambitious plan. World-class sporting facilities, new transport links, hundreds of flats to accommodate competitors, and even the largest park to be built in Britain in over a century. All this was going to cost a lot of money, an eye-watering £8 billion. The man in charge of ensuring it wasn't wasted was Chief Executive David Higgins.
This is something tangible. This is real, it's jobs. 75p in the pound of every single pound that's spent on this site will be here long term.
The place for all of this investment was Stratford in East London. It is one of the poorest, most deprived areas in London, full of crumbling factories and rubbish yards. David and his team hadn't made it easy for themselves.
It was rough. A lot of derelict land, a lot of contaminated waste, and had the detritus of industrial development, power lines, old pipes.
It was a tall order to turn this semi-derelict wasteland into prime Olympic real estate, and it fell on Jan Helling's shoulders.
We were the very first people on the site, so the whole of the project really was dependent on us.
With the clock ticking ever closer to 2012, the biggest demolition project in Europe was at last underway. Over 200 buildings had to be knocked down and thousands of tons of concrete and bricks cleared by an army of excavators, diggers and cranes. But it couldn't just be demolished. To stick to the promise that this would be a green Olympics, Jan and his team had to save 90% of the rubble to be reused later on the site.
It would have been much easier just to knock things down and throw them in the back of a truck and then send them off somewhere else.
Instead of just being dumped in Britain's landfills, each building had to be dismantled piece by piece.
All the buildings, for example, that are being crushed are being used as foundations for other projects. And so the whole legacy, really, of the past lives on in the future.
Even on this huge scale, knocking down the derelict buildings was the easy part of clearing the site. There were far bigger and deadlier obstacles. More than 50 electricity pylons and kilometers of high-voltage cables crisscrossed the area. Construction couldn't start until they'd found a way to reroute them.
I can remember coming to the site and said, it will never work. with these huge, massive distribution pylons, 52 pylons, running through the middle of the site.
The solution lay deep beneath the ground. The team came up with a plan to bury the cables in 2 new tunnels, each 6 kilometers long. Tunnels like this would normally take 4 years to build. The team had just 2. It was hugely ambitious, and it wasn't certain they'd make the deadline. But after months of working around the clock, the first of the underground teams finally broke into daylight. But the celebration would be short-lived. Deep beneath the ground, there lay a poisonous problem. Coming up, toxic waste threatens to stop the project dead in its tracks.
So there are a variety of different contaminants within the ground.
And Britain's weather conditions leave the stadium design in doubt.
It was all hands on deck to get the design right.